Alrighty, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Stephanie and I am an adult services librarian at the Monrovia Public Library. And I'm leading the Book to Action series, which is brought to us by the California Center for the Book. We're so thankful to them for their support. And the series was inspired by the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And our overall theme is sustainability. So there is almost no better person to talk to in the community about sustainability than who we are here with today, which is Giangelo, who has quite the list of accolades. He's a certified California naturalist, a UC climate steward, program director at Food Exploration and Discovery, garden leader as well at the Monrovia Community Garden, and just all around an incredible Monrovian and a good friend. So thank you so much for being here, Giangelo. He's going to be sharing with us a lot of great information about how to firescape our homes in Monrovia. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to talk about firescaping in Monrovia. So I hope that everybody can see this, but we are talking about firescaping, and really just it's a great opportunity to highlight some of the things learned from the book that we all read this year, as well as taking it to action, right? And bringing firescaping, which we'll be talking about, is a term for landscaping to prevent fires in our homes, but taking it to action and actionable items that we can do around our homes. So I just wanted to introduce myself briefly. Thank you, Stephanie, for some of the things. And we don't need to go through my accolades. That's a little silly. But I am a lifelong Monrovian. I went to Wild Rose, Clifton, and Monrovia High School. I live here now. I'm a Monrovia Community Services Commissioner. I'm on the board of the Monrovia Parks Wilderness and Recreation Foundation. And then I'm also the Community Initiatives and Program Director at Food Exploration and Discovery, which is a nonprofit in town. We're stationed in Monrovia, work in the San Gabriel Valley, and we bring garden and food science education and programming to schools and cities. So that's a little bit about me. And if you were looking for somebody to geek out about plants, nature, and also, bringing action to our homes concerning those things, then I am sort of the person to talk to because I can just talk about these things all day. So let's get started. So, and actually, well, before we get started, I did want to put a warning up for everybody. The next few slides are going to have some pictures of the bobcat fire and the fire when it was up in our foothills. And so if anybody doesn't want to see those images, I know they can be hard to process through. It was a very difficult time for everybody. So if you wanted to just not look at your screen for the next moment, you can go ahead and do so. But I'm going to go ahead and proceed now. So the bobcat fire, and just a refresher, we don't want a refresher, but the bobcat fire was something in our community that definitely had a lasting imprint on all of us. I think it was, iconic and I don't know if iconic is the exact right word that I'd like to use, but really when we had that M etched into their mountains, and it was, in parallel with the M that we're used to seeing, right, which is usually lit up after football games. It was a harrowing scene. It was very difficult to process. And, I think that it affected all of us and the larger California communities around us and beyond with the smoke that our fire produced. So I think that our city has done an excellent job at talking about the fire, talking about some of the mitigation efforts, and really getting the information out there as Canyon Park reopens and as the Hillside Wilderness is on its way to recovery. And so part of one of my certifications that was mentioned before is I'm a UC climate steward. And so part of that was examining how in our community are we looking at fire? Are we looking at it through a lens of trauma and disarray and chaos, or are we looking at it as a way to look at actionable items, ways to look at sustainability in our community and look at ways to move past fire and these issues? So these images were difficult for everyone to see. This is how our canyon looks now. It's on its way to recovery, but it's difficult to see. And so largely, and I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly. We don't need to land on it, but where we're at right now is that the canyon is going to be reopening. It's not far off, but it's not open right now. It's closed indefinitely. But we are turning a corner on some of the the images that we've seen of the fire. Our mountains are still pretty charred right now. And it just, in some ways, it can feel like it's not really over yet and we haven't gone past it yet. But there are exciting things in our community that are moving in that direction. And part of that, and I just wanted to throw some praise out to the library for putting together Book to Action 2021. I thought that the Book to Action 2020 was amazing. 2021 has been even more delightful. And a lot of the programming around braiding sweetgrass and the film viewings and the Live with Locals conversations have been incredible at reimagining how does Monrovia emerge from the ashes? How does Monrovia come back from something that was so difficult for our community? And fortunately, on May 11th, I was part of the Live with Locals Instagram chat. And one of the stories I got to share was our local Bronton's Milk Fetch, which was talking about an endangered plant in Monrovia that only propagates from fire. And so, while the fire was scary and there were moments where people were, going to be evacuated and we couldn't breathe well for a long time after, there are things that are beautiful and delightful around the corner for us. And part of that is we could be getting more of our protected and endangered Bronton milk vetch in our foothills. So that was something that, is good. And now it's our job to find some action in what we can do with our homes. So that's what we're talking about today, is what is firescaping? Firescaping. Are we using fire to landscape? No, we're using landscaping to prevent fire around our homes. So largely, I want to talk about firescaping with you all today as an idea of preparedness, and then in two functions. One, to create a defensible space and reduce the fuel load. So we're going to be talking about some landscaping techniques to protect our homes, and then also in choosing the right plants, which plants are good for our defensible space and which plants are bad. So when we're talking about creating a defensible space, we want to do a few things. Now, part of that is minimizing the pathways for wildfire to access our homes. I'm going to talk about these zones in the next slide, but we really want to start thinking about fire and firescaping as preventable if we start applying more of these firescaping practices in the borders around our home and with our neighbors. And then we also want to protect, obviously, we want to protect the structures that are our homes, that are our neighbors' homes. And then we also want to make sure that spaces are protected for fire personnel that are going to be coming into our homes. So we don't want to be lining the areas around our home with, thorny plants, plants that are reducing fire vehicles to be able to access our homes. So we want to be conscious of how we're protecting our homes with our landscaping. That's all part of firescaping. So when we think about this, I'm going to refer to these three zones as the immediate zone, the intermediate zone, and the extended zone. And that immediate zone is going to be 0 to 5 feet away from our homes. The intermediate is 5 to 30 feet away, and the extended is 30 to 100 or further out from our homes. And we're going to talk about those zones starting from the exterior, which is the extended zone, 30 to 100 feet away. It's also called a transition zone. I usually call it transition zone, but it's going to be the far end of our properties, or it could be our neighbors' homes, or it can be transition zones that are outside, that are part of our hillside, or part of native region that is protected or not protected. So one thing that we want to do in this space is we want to talk to our neighbors about existing fire hazards. So if you have a neighbor that has flammable, weedy plants, and where you are in a fire-prone space, that is definitely something that you want to bring to their attention, and then also work with them to mitigate those existing hazards. In addition, it's not always our neighbors, but sometimes it is just open land. And in these spaces, what we want to do is help our community and some of our land managers watch the abundance of dry material and invasive plants that are growing in there, and then report them and bring them to everybody's attention so that we can continue to mitigate within the extended zone. But the extended zone is definitely a space that is more difficult to manage. Sometimes it's not on your property. Sometimes it's someone else's home that is not keen on managing some of the hazards. And sometimes it's land that we just do not have access to and that are difficult to manage. And so, it is important for us to keep an eye on them, but I sort of leave it to, in terms of firescaping, is to maintain a watchful eye and just have conversations with our neighbors about those spaces. And then we get into the 50 to 30 foot range outside of our homes, and that's going to be the intermediate zone, also called the green belt zone. And really, we're going to be thinking about this space as the plants that are interwoven with hardscaping, which is rocks or tile or pathways, and how we use that space to effectively move fire away from us. So I wanted to give an example for some of the hillside folks that might be joining us or that live in the hillside. And these two pictures are great examples of two examples of what those beltways, those green belts might look like. It's actually a space that is hugging the outside exterior of a home, and it's putting plants at distances between each other, but also there's obvious gaps between the home and that extended region outside of that. For non-sloping spaces and for other homes that are not necessarily on the hillside, it's still important to have plant spacing. And this is an example where hardscaping is used to create a barrier between a section of plants. But largely in that space, we're sort of creating islands that fire is not able to jump over so easily. Now, part of this defensible space in the intermediate zone is really a lot of our spacing of our plants. So when we're maintaining our plants, some of our trees, we want to try to keep foliage away from at least 6 feet below the tree because we don't want to create fire ladders. So if you have a 2-foot plant by a 4-foot plant by a 6-foot tree by a 12-foot tree, that plant is going to spread fire upward. And on a slope, fire and wind move fires much more quickly up slopes, and slopes are actually, in a lot of cases, more dangerous. And so we want to maintain appropriate spacing for our plants just to help mitigate plants in that zone. But going back to some of the, oh, and actually, if anybody would like to take a picture of this, this is actually a really good guide for spacing. And I'll leave that up there for a few more seconds while I blabber on about fire ladders. But fire ladders are not just about plants that are right next to each other. If we're not creating those islands to sort of break them apart, fire ladders can be plants that are just too large, but they're spreading across an entire landscape. And the fire ladder is just plants that can be touching too much or not evenly spaced out. So what I do recommend is intertwining your landscaping with some hardscaping. And we're kind of thinking of building islands of vegetation. So this image here is a great example of how you can use rocks or some of the rocks that you can find in your neighborhood or on your property to break up spacing of plants. And you can do it in really interesting ways. I like to recommend if you, after this or this last year, and you need that Zen zone to put in a Zen garden, I say use it to your benefit. Get that Zen garden in there and just start using it every day, zone out, and then, you know, put in some sand to help mitigate some fire and also help your mind. But one of the best ways, and what we do at Food Ed a lot, is we want to build bioswales. Bioswales look like rock rivers, but they are vehicles for collecting water and spacing out the landscape, and they also work as a fire break. So when we have rains, they're going to fill up with water, and they're going to pull that water down to the ground, which is going to make our plants more waterlogged, which is good. When we want them to have more water when there is fire season. And then it's also going to be building the soil, because the soil is not going to be so dry, and it's not going to leave so much space for some invasive grasses to come in. So bioswales are good. This is a bioswale that we built at FA Middle School. Actually, today was, we had the students out. They're back in school now, and they were out in this space exploring what plants are there right now, what insects are coming into the space, what birds are visiting. And so the bioswale is all a part of that. It's building an ecosystem that is sustainable. And in this garden space, we also built in pathways that not necessarily built for firescaping, but are an example of how you could use reclaimed wood, pebbles, and gravel to split up your garden a little bit more by making more pathways and ways to make individual islands of vegetation. So we use this reclaimed wood pieces. They were collected from wood that would have just been put into landfill, and instead it was reclaimed and repurposed. And so now they're excellent pavers for us. And then those pathways are cutting through the landscape and just breaking up the space where vegetation could be touching each other throughout. So moving on to the immediate zone, that's when we're talking about that 0 to 5 foot space. What is right against my home? I would say even in that 10-foot zone, what is touching the home and what is safe and not safe. So some obvious things, and I hope they're obvious, but we don't want to have wood piles and really heavily wooded plants right against our homes, and overhanging trees, plants that are going to be hanging over our homes. This image on the bottom, while it looks like a very lush garden, it looks beautiful, looks like a house that might even be in Monrovia, that is a great example of a fire ladder. Too many plants at varied heights just leading right up to the house. So if a fire starts on those lower perennials with the white flowers, they're just going to go all the way up to that cedar on the left, and there goes the house. So we want to be conscious of that. And in that 0 to 5 to 10-foot zone, instead be reconsidering islands of vegetation that are more densely or less densely planted. This is a picture that I like to include whenever I do a presentation like this. This is, these were aloe plants that were planted right against a home, and they had so much moisture in them that they actually protected the home because the fire couldn't move past that zone. Now, if you look down at the ground, it's largely bare. There's no fire ladder here. And as a last line of defense, these moisture heavy succulents, and there were some native succulents as well, completely contain the fire. Now, I'm not saying that all succulents will do that, but it's a great example of how choosing the right plant can help protect your home. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about choosing the right plants. So three of the ways that we want to think about selecting plants for our firescaping zones is we want to first avoid invasive plants. Second, we want to select low fuel, which means not high oils, not lots of bark, not lots of leaf shed, plants that have high moisture, and then plants that are quick burning. Now, fun ecological fact, in Australia, plants are adapted there to actually have lots of high oils. So eucalyptus, for instance, is a high oil plant. The leaves are high oil, but it's designed in that habitat to burn very quickly. So all of the high oil leaves fall underneath the eucalyptus, and then they all burn very quickly. So when there's fire, it just goes right through the leaves and leaves the trees alone. So the bark is mostly protected. The trunk is largely protected because that leaf barrier just moves through. In California, eucalyptus can be an issue instead because our fire is a different type of fire. We have plants that want to burn because a lot of them are adapted to burning to germinate. And so here in California, when we have invasive eucalyptus, that's going to be actually moving fire to different locations. So we'll talk about quick burning versus slow burning in the next few slides. And then we also want to consider the use of native and drought tolerant plants. And really those are going to be the keystone pieces of a good firescape because they are designed to live in fire prone areas, and they are generally, and not always, that they're not always more fire resistant, but they tend to be more fire resistant and tolerate fire conditions. Now, I think that one of the things we'll talk about after is also no plant is fire resistant. Something can be marketed as fire resistant, but everything can burn, everything can dry up, everything can be ill maintained and still burn. But in general, native plants and drought tolerant plants are going to be more in line with what we want to be using. So when we're talking about avoiding invasive plants, this is 3 examples of grasses that we don't want to be using in our landscape and are very invasive to our local region. So that means invasive means that they're going to be spreading very rapidly, and they're going to fill spaces where we don't want them to be. So for instance, on our hillside, now that the bobcat fire has gone through, these plants are going to be coming in quickly because their seeds move quickly, the plants grow quickly, and instead of the natives reclaiming those spaces, these invasive plants are going to take over. Now, these plants are excellent fuel for fire. So pampas grass is the picture on the left. Fountain grass looks like fireworks. That's the picture on the right. And the bottom, giant reed, which we don't see very much in Southern California, but sometimes you see them on the hillside, are very highly combustible plants. These 3 are also, they're very hot burners. So they tend to, in the inside of their foliage, to collect a lot of woody material. They tend to, when they dry back, they tend to leave a lot of their dry material from the previous year. So they actually burn very hot, very much so that they are excellent fire ladders. And so pampas grass is a low grass, pampas and giant reed are very tall grasses, and they burn hot and they spread through our landscape. So we don't want to use these types of grasses. In terms of trees, these are three great examples of trees we want to avoid. Acacias, the eucalyptus, and Peruvian peppers tend to be very high in oil content. So they're going to be burning, another example of a hot fire. And they are very pervasive and invasive. So eucalyptus can spread. You could plant one eucalyptus tree and you could have 10 on the hillside. In recent years, they haven't been as prolific, but they are seen throughout our hillside. Peruvian pepper is a very common tree in California, and it's spread by birds eating the seeds and then dropping the seeds through their droppings on our hillside or around our canyon. And those trees as well, with their shaggy bark, are going to be able to combust much more quickly. So these are three great examples of trees that we want to avoid. And then plants like vines and shrubs, broom varieties, that's the yellow flower on the left. They're very invasive, they spread really quickly, and they also carry, or they can be host to insects that carry diseases, which would stunt our native plants, and then those plants would also be more prone to more burning. So broom varieties of plants we want to be avoiding, and then plants like some ivies, which can be invasive, like the Cape ivy. Not all ornamental ivies are invasive, but Cape ivy does spread very well in some of our cooler spaces and burns very hot. So what do we want? Well, we want a low, let me, hold on 1 second. Let me move this. There we go. We want low fuel plants that have high moisture and burn quickly. So succulents, I mentioned before. I love this picture. It's an insane picture to highlight how succulents can be used in the landscape to slow the flow of fire moving toward a home. But really, they are also great if you are interested in having more of a desert garden. They do work well in some of those very hardscaped gardens, but they also work well in gardens that just have mulch and in that vegetation island. So they're not just desert plants. They work well with a lot of our California natives. Oh, missing a slide there. I'm going to go back to this then, and we'll just keep it here. So some of our lower fuel plants are going to be plants that are lower in oils, and then our quick burning plants are going to be plants that have thin, waxy leaves. So a lot of California natives, which are designed to live in California, have leaves that don't hold a lot of moisture, but they fall off and they burn off really quickly. So that fire is not going to be able to really smolder and transfer as well on plants that have smaller leaves, have drier leaves, but anything that's larger and drier is going to be able to burn well. So a lot of our native plants are key for that. So let's talk about those plants. I mentioned before, not every fire plant or not every fire resistant plant is actually that fire safe. Everything can burn. There's no plant that cannot burn, but it's about putting the right plant in the right place. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So some of the California native and drought tolerant plants, like I just mentioned before, are adapted with waxes and oils and resins that are going to be key for reducing fire spread, but they're also a lot slower growing. So they're going to be a lot easier to manage for us inside of the landscape. And they're not really going to be growing to heights where, now trees will, but a lot of the shrubs and a lot of the perennials are going to stay smaller, be much more manageable, and you're going to be able to see the fire ladder happening over a longer period of time. So you'll be able to act much more quickly. In addition, a lot of our California natives also have reduced shed bark. So they're not going to be shedding high volumes of bark that is just going to act as fuel for fires. Some of our plants like manzanita look like they do, but a lot of their bark is fire resistant as well. So we're not going to just have combustible material building and building up. Plants like California poppies, which are not necessarily part of fire-prone zones, will just burn up very quickly. If you look at the picture on the left of the picture, there's one of our native succulent varieties, which I think is an edible one as well. But you're really not going to be seeing excessive damage to those native plants. And so they're going to be really good options. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of plants that we can look into and we could discuss, but I really want to give you two resources that are really great resources for choosing some of those drought tolerant plants and some of those California native plants. The first book is The Drought Defying California Garden. And then the other one is, and I think I did bring it out and I brought another one with me. California Native Plants for the Garden. It's an excellent tome. It really is. It's getting harder to find. I don't think that you can find it online as quickly for a good price, but I know that Theodore Payne Nursery, they do have them for sale. But this is one of the best resources for selecting those California native plants. And then if you're more interested in just some of the history and background on some of these plants, this is Matt Ritter's new book, and it's California Plants, A Guide to Our Iconic Flora. Really great tome for some of the plants that we have in California. It's very well documented with great images. And so I would recommend picking up a copy of this plant book as well. And then The Drought Defying California Garden also gets really into a lot of the low water plants that are going to be not only saving us money on water, but really going to be integral to what does a sustainable Monrovia look like. That's going to be preserving water. That's going to be putting in native plants. That's going to be building bioswales and firescaping. And so that is a great book for really getting some creative juices flowing and considering what we can do with these plants. Because I think that particularly for native plants, sometimes there's an idea that they're just drab and dry and these brown things and they don't look great in the winter. But more often than not, if you're choosing the right ones, they can be just as gratifying, if not more gratifying, to our landscape. They're beautiful. They have the same colors as many of the ornamental plants that would be alternatives for them. And at the same time, they're supporting our local habitats. They're building our ecosystem. Birds are able to visit your garden more often. You're going to have better insects that are eating the bad insects that you don't want. And so firescaping is not just the utility of protecting our homes from fire, but it's really engaging with the environment that we have here, this great space that we have shared up on our hillside in our canyon, and that the part of Monrovia that should be everlasting, and we want to help preserve and maintain. And part of that is doing effective firescaping at home, but also being conscious of our larger ecosystem and the systems that we're a part of. So bringing it back to myself, and we're going to be wrapping up soon. I didn't want to keep everybody too long today because I know it's the end of Book to Action and it's almost the weekend. And so I'm going to wrap it up pretty quickly. But when I was working on my UC Climate Stewards project, I really wanted to think of ways, how do we bring our community together to think about resiliency and adaptation in light of these climate emergencies and these issues that are very pressing and very obvious to our community. Fire does not happen frequently in Monrovia, and fire that close to us does not happen that frequently. And so it's important for us to understand fire ecology, understand what we can do, how we can take action to mitigate fire risks to our homes, and then further really think about how we're bringing our community together to reconsider what fire means to Monrovia. It is not the worst thing in the world. There are beautiful things that can come from fire. We saw how our community rallied around each other, how our fire personnel, how much we rallied around them with, like, even the Monrovia Rocks installation. But knowing that fire is a part of Monrovia, it's a part of it. It will be a part of our future, and so it's important for us to find sustainable ways to manage fire around our homes and support the ecosystems around us that are going to be mitigating fire, hopefully naturally, but with perspectives that benefit our community and are not just moments of terror and moments of difficulty for us to go through, but a rallying point for us to come together and in fact maybe find, an opportunity to build systems that are going to make us all safer in the future. So largely I just wanted to leave you all with two more resources. Fire Safe Council of LA has a great native plant and fire safe plant list that you can find a PDF online. Go ahead and take a picture of the screen right now. And then a lot of the information that I was trained on and that I've used as my resource, even for this presentation, comes from the UCANR, that's the University of California's Agriculture and Natural Resources website, Fire in California, the UCCE's Fire in California website. You can find the link right there. But talking about a lot of these things and thinking about fire and new perspectives in connection to science and traditional and indigenous practices that are going to make managing fire in Monrovia better for all of us. So I just like to take this opportunity again to thank the library staff for putting together an amazing Book to Action 2021. Thank our community for being excellent, all of our neighboring communities for being excellent. I think that the Bobcat Fire was a great example of how we can come together. And I would like to put my email out there. If you have any further questions, you can email me at geolios@explorefooded.org. That's my personal Instagram. You can find me at geoscapes, and we can talk plants and fire and nature and birds and everything you want to talk about on my Instagram. So feel free to direct message me. And then I'd also encourage everybody to visit our website at explorefooded.org. We are doing a lot of work in the community to build more of that connected ecosystem in Monrovia. We are in a lot of the Monrovia schools now, and we are looking to bring together more of a home team that wants to engage in these practices, connect with the library and the great work that they're doing, and just keep at it and doing our best. So thank you everybody so much for your time. And I'm going to give it back to Stephanie and open up for any of your burning questions. Ha ha ha. I'm very good at puns. Thank you all so much.
Oh man, every time we get a chance to talk with you, Gio, I'm always laughing. So that was a great pun. Thank you so much. It was a incredible wealth of information as always. And at this point in time, everyone, please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat, and I will happily relay those on. And as you were speaking, I had a question of my own that I wanted to kind of ask as we're waiting for more questions to come in. Do you have any recommendations for folks that are living in apartments that really don't have control over those the landscape, but might be willing to maybe, I don't know, maybe speak to apartment managers and things like that? Do you have any recommendations to kind of identify and create those conversations?
Totally. I think that one of the great things that we should be working on in town, and I'd love for people to reach out on this topic, but we used to have a very active fire council in Monrovia, and that organization sort of, and because we didn't really have pressing fire issues, but putting together a fire council that speaks to those needs, really looking at how do we, not just for homeowners and for single family dwellings, but how do we make sure that apartment and like HOA management, right? And talking about where more people are connected are able to also instigate conversations of firescaping. So I think it's a hard thing to say, please change our landscaping, but I think that it's also pressure on us to find the opportunity to educate ourselves on which plants might be better to put in place of some plants. And then find some collective conversation on, what does our community want? Does our community want to be bringing together some of these perspectives on firescaping? And then further, do we want to sort of expect that firescaping is sort of our new normal, right? Fire is normal to California. Fire is not going away. And fire is something that, look, I think it's difficult to discuss that fires are getting worse in California, right? The fire's not going away. And so it's important for us as our landscapes change, and not just our backyard landscapes, but our hillside landscapes, to find solutions that are geared for everybody. And I think that if you live in an apartment and you're thinking of ways of changing the landscape around you, I think it's starting to have conversations about firescaping and engaging property managers and your neighbors and bringing people together to talk about, we don't need all of those cedar plants going right against my window all the way up to the third floor. How about, taking that out and putting in some drought tolerant native? So, yeah.
I know. I think that's great, information, because I think, a lot of the conversations that I've kind of been engaging in so far, just as a part of Book to Action, a lot of them are centered around the homeowners, and understandably so. I think a lot of the people that are impacted by wildfires are people that have homes that are, beautifully nestled in, the forests and things like that. But it made me think a little bit about, apartments and what, people could do. And so you mentioned the Fire Safety Council. And if someone, on this call right now, or if someone, that comes to this in the future and watches the recording, and they decide, you know what, I'm going to take up that mantle, I want to get it started. What would you recommend that person to do to get started? Is there somewhere they have to go, someone they have to talk to sort of, bring that back to life?
One of the great resources is the Fire Safety Council's website.
Mhm.
And they'll really give you a toolkit to put together an organization in your hometown.
Mhm.
And so they make it incredibly easy. Part of a Fire Safety Council, I think one of the difficulties is maintaining it. It becomes an organization, right? And so it
Mhm.
can be difficult to rally the organizational needs of a Fire Safety Council, but the resources are there. And I do recommend, I think that a great opportunity and conversation that can be had is creating partnerships with people in town that are already doing similar work or touching work, right?
Mhm.
So for instance, I mentioned the Monrovia Parks, Wilderness and Recreation Foundation. What we're doing is working on enhancing the features of our parks, right? Bringing in how are we recovering from the bobcat fire? And in that, we are connecting people to resources in town. And so I think it would be a great partnership. And I would love to talk to anybody on this call about setting up a fire safety council, even as an offshoot, potentially as Empower, or in coordination with the city, because I think more than ever, it's something that we should start rallying people together to start thinking about. I'll be honest, Stephanie, I have an interest in doing it myself, but then
Mhm.
you also saw all of the other things that I do. And so, I want to give those things the due time that they deserve. But yeah, I think that there's an energy and a need to do it in town, but great resources on those websites. It's almost here's a toolkit. You just figure out these 10 things and you can do it.
Yeah.
But I think that it starts with I think everything that works starts with building community, and that
Mhm.
starts with talking to your neighbors. That means uh, going to the street fair and setting up a table and start talking to neighbors about how what are the resources that we need, what are the ways that we need to be engaging about this. Do we need a quarterly meeting about fire safety in Monrovia?
Mhm.
Should we be engaging our neighbors that have those spaces that are fire hazards, right? What do we do? And so it doesn't have to be a fire safety council, but it can turn into a fire safety council. And just
Mhm.
having the conversations with our neighbors can sort of be the legwork that sort of makes it happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like you mentioned, there are so many. As I'm learning through Book to Action, there's so many great leaders in this community that are already doing this work, and being able to connect with them. I think we can, really take, as I keep saying throughout the series, take that action portion and out of Book to Action and really make some great changes happen. I see that we have a question in the chat, and it says, when it comes to fencing, especially adjacent to the home, what are the best materials to use?
Yeah, that is a great question because it's a tricky question, right? The resources that we use, it's hard to say go for wrought iron because it's expensive and it's not always the right material, but it is fire resistant. Wood fences, though, on the other hand, at certain heights can be okay if they if they are going to catch fire. Um, but what I would recommend in that sense is it I think it matters less what your material is and how the space around it is managed. So if you have a fire ladder, we're talking about a fire ladder going up to a house, um, a fire ladder up to a fence is potentially even worse because if a fence that's wood catches on fire and it goes the border of a home all the way to a neighbor's home, then we've created a longer fire ladder. So I think when it comes to fencing, natural fences, a lot of plant material can be used as fences, and it doesn't always have to be wood or plastic or metal. But I think that it's engaging with how we uh, protect the space. And I think that maybe with a fence, you know, even if you create a channel or a bioswale, right, along a fence instead, and have a little bit more hardscaping if you're in a fire prone zone, and then putting more plant islands, spaced apart, then you could probably be fine with any material. But I think that, obviously wood comes to mind as a fire hazard. Um, but there are ways to protect wood naturally as well. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Awesome, thank you. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to put those in the chat as well, or any new questions, and we can get those answered. So,
Stephanie, I have a question for you.
yeah, absolutely.
So is there, and I don't know if this is too early to ask, but is there any way that Book to Action 2022 happens? How does that happen? Because that would be exciting.
Yeah, that's a great question, and someone actually asked me that question today. And as as I touched on a little bit at the beginning, it's a grant program, and so we're dependent upon funding from the grant, which is offered by California Center for the Book, who is supported by the California Library Association, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the California State Library, and so forth. And so as long as that grant continues on, it's something that's very much at the forefront of the Adult Services Department minds at the library. And so if it continues, provided we're able to, it's something that we're definitely interested in applying for. And also, we had some discussions in some of our recent meetings, as well as even, whether, regardless of the grant, kind of continuing these types of events and programs throughout the calendar year, if possible, because we found that folks are, very interested in this. We've had some of our highest attendance rates for programs during this Book to Action, and just the most, in overall engagement, people asking questions on social media, people asking questions in webinars like this. So I guess to kind of, sum that up, I don't know if we'll know in the fall when the grant information usually comes out, whether or not we'll be able to apply. And at that point in time is usually when we start to look at what's happening in the community to kind of figure out what our topic would be for that year. So, at this in fall of last year, the Bobcat Fire was happening as we were applying for the grant. So it was kind of a no-brainer for what our topic was going to be. But around that time, we can put out some surveys, kind of get some feedback from the community to see what people would like to do. But stuff around sustainability seems to kind of always come up as something that the community is interested in. So if the interest is there, if we're able to get the grant, then this is something that we continue, and especially as it relates to sustainability. And we could look to community leaders like you and just folks in the community that are interested to help guide us in the selection of a book as well. That's something that so far, we at the library have been making those book selections, based on, reviews, feedback from our greater library community. But we would also love to hear what other folks directly in our community would want to read. So yeah, long story short, more info to come in the fall. We're usually able to make those announcements, January of 2022. And yeah, so hopefully, fingers crossed, more to come. But as a sort of sneak peek to our fall plans, we are in very early talks of doing some additional sustainability program in potentially September, October, and November, and likely in person. So we'll see.
There we go. Round of applause for that, everybody. Round of applause for that. Awesome.
Yeah, I hope I answered your question. I know I kind of went in a circle with that one.
It's all fingers crossed. I learned so much this year. And like the Live with Locals, I had okay, sure. Sometimes like you would think watching some of our municipal leaders talk about green infrastructure would not be the highlight of my day. Absolute highlight of my day. Loved it. Yeah, no, I had a delightful time. So I wanted to, you guys are awesome. And I hope it comes back.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a series where we're no promises, but that's also a series that we're talking about potentially continuing long term, regardless of the topic. So yeah, that's another one. Hopefully you'll get to see some more of that. But yeah, I'm gonna see. Okay, so we have no more questions in the chat for now. And there was one other that I was thinking of as you were speaking. I'm gonna see if it comes to me. Oh, yes. Okay. So I was thinking, okay, so now you've given us all of this incredible information about, what we should be keeping in mind as we're getting ready to firescape and kind of, assessing our homes. So this is kind of like a two-part question. Do you know of any sort of community programs or resources that would help folks get started in maybe assessing their homes with changes they can make, or making recommendations directly for plant purchases, things like that? And then also, I know too that making changes also would require some financial decisions. So do you know if there are any programs that offer financial aid to do this, whether it's local to Monrovia or state funded, things like that?
There are, and I would like to push that if we did have a fire safe council, there would be great grants that we could be applying for. So I'll put that out there again. But in terms of resources, I would definitely start at some of our native nurseries. So Theodore Payne, not only do they have great plants, but they also have great education and programming on a lot of the subject. And so connecting people to resources, but there are great resources. What is the name of the nursery that does? They work with a like a rebate program that's very similar. You know what? What I'll do is I'll send that to you. We can also send it out to some of the people that are attending, and then, but also anybody. I mean, feel free to reach out to my social media, because even when I'm at a nursery and I notice something, but I will be honest though, there is not a lot in terms of firescaping resources, because it's not a great selling point, right? So you're not going to see buy these plants because of fire. So you won't see resources in retail environments, but there are government grants for organizations that can go out to communities. But honestly, we do not have those institutions in Monrovia. But I would say that, and I don't want to speak on too much on, we're putting the pressure on public works, but we have a great public works team that will help you out. They still have a planting a tree program where they are conscious of a lot of the trees that are going in, that they're good trees for our spaces. And our Monrovian team will not just turn you away if you need help removing some plants, bringing in somebody to appropriately maintain some trees. You will not just be left behind. And our Monrovia team is very excellent at helping out neighbors with some of those resources. So I would recommend give them a call. I know that our city manager, Dylan, is on Facebook, and he will literally just answer like a question that he sees on Facebook, which blows my mind, because he'll just answer it right away. But like there are ways to reach out. I guess I'm a community services commissioner, so like helping connect to some of city staff, reach out to me, give me a call. I think that if you email me, I'll give you my phone number. I won't give my phone number right here, but I tend to be somebody that gives out my phone number. And so we do have resources in town. And one of the questions I saw pop up was resources in San Diego. I'm listening from there. San Diego, I believe there might be something, community. Oh, great. I would say that our local extension offices, so like if that were to be at a community college, or some of our UC schools, have great extension offices that can connect people to those resources. Locally, we also have the LA Arboretum Library, which is an excellent resource. And they have great connections for people that are providing resources, as well as, like, I think that even their native plant sale, they'll do like some of the plants that aren't the prettiest, you can pick them up afterward or that type of thing. So I would connect with some of our local resources. And then in terms of San Diego, there's also, what is the name of that nursery? Oh man, today is not a good day for memory having. But there is a nursery that has, oh, it's a beautiful place. It's all full of native plants, and they do work with some of the schools. Oh, reach out to me. I'll remember then. But San Diego is also known for having really great nurseries, great resources. So,
Yeah.
oh, and I see Jade throwing up a bunch of stuff too. Not throwing up, I mean, but you know, I hope you're feeling well. I didn't mean it like that. No, but these are great resources. Oh, California Native Plant Society, best resources in terms of native plants, and where we can find them, and more information about them, what kind of insects they attract, what kind of birds they attract, and then also if they are more usable in firescaping. So that is a great resource. Thank you for that, Jade.
Yeah, and we are hoping to do a program in the future with the Hahamungna Nursery, which is a part of Arroyo Seco, and Jade has also linked their information in the chat as well. And they did let us know that oftentimes they're able to offer native plants at lower cost. So that's another resource for locally for Monrovia. They're in Pasadena, I believe. So something else that's a little close to home, not too far. So yeah, and yes, thank you, Jade. But yeah, if there are no more questions, I think we are good to sort of wrap up here. Do you have any final thoughts, any final questions, anything you'd like to share?
Me, I would just say, let's I don't know, how can we thank our library for putting together like such an amazing program this year? Like this was important for my mental health to like exist with a sphere where our library is putting together such great programming. So thank you guys, thank our community for engaging with this stuff. And yeah, let's just come together, put some plants in the ground, and protect our neighbors. So thanks everybody so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I can't say thank you enough to everybody that's here and to you as well. So much of the direction that this program took was a part of information that you shared with us and being able to connect with you. So fantastic. I almost said fantabulous.
Hey, no,
but that
fantabulous. No, this is fantabulous. Immensely fantabulous. That's a great word for the day. Thank you.
Yeah.